All right, so moving right along, we are getting to the point now where we're going to start to make this look like a world. We've already kind of started with the terrain, and next we are going to start adding some details. Now, details can be pretty much any object that makes the world seem more believable, that, there are things living and breathing and basically inside of this world. Otherwise, it's just an empty plane with, not much going on. So going back to terrain objects here, we're going to first of all bring in some buildings. All right. Maybe before we do that, let's put a little bit of the small details before we get into bigger details. So we're going to click our terrain. We're going to select it, and we're going to add some trees. Okay, so in this case right here, you'll see the third button is to paint some trees. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring in an asset from the pack that I've supplied called trees. We're going to bring it into terrain objects. We're going to just drop it in there. Okay, and inside terrain objects, you will see there's a folder called prefabs, and we've got 3 trees. We've got some pine trees, an oak tree, a palm tree, and a poplar tree. So it really depends on what kind of a world you're setting. I'm going to make this look sort of like a Viking medieval world. So I want some pine fir trees in here. And the way we're going to add this is we go to our terrain editor. We are in the tree editor. We are going to go to Edit Trees, Add a Tree. By the way, you can have as many of these as you want. And it's going to ask us what is the game object for the tree. We are going to drop in the tree that we want, which is, in this case, the fir tree. Or you can pick whichever one you want. And we have it Casting Shadows is on. And the bend factor is how much does it bend when the wind is blowing? And that gets into more of the sort of environment that we set up later. But we could set it to 1 for now. Let's just see what it does. We're going to hit add. And this is a lot of fun. Okay, set your brush size down, sort of small. Set your tree density down as well. Probably about 10 is more than enough. And then randomize your tree height, okay, so that you're getting a random amount of height on every tree that comes in. You can have a random width, which doesn't make much sense with a tree. You'd want them to be sort of consistent. You can vary the color, so it'll adjust the hue of the trees so they're not all exactly the same tone. It'll rotate them randomly. And then all you got to do is just click. And so as I click, how come I'm not getting more trees? I want some more trees. Let's make that a little smaller. Whoa, way too many. All right. I think I understand why it's adding so many trees in such a small place here. You'll notice as I go around, I have more or less trees depending on the area that I'm working on. Now, I think the reason for that is because we shrunk down our terrain at the start. And maybe we shouldn't have done that, because now, as you can see, we are not able to really put trees in a very dense sort of area. I would have to really crank the density. Oh, okay, that works pretty good actually. If I increase the density, bring up my brush size, maybe that's way too much, but I am able to. Okay, here we go. So you can see how we've got these trees that have been added, and actually I completely covered up the treasure chest. So in order to delete a tree, just hold Shift, and you can get rid of the trees. And now we're kind of creating this little cove of, like a little forest cove of trees. Now, you'll notice that the trees are huge. They really are massive. And, even the height here, I could have probably adjusted. So maybe I'll go back. I'm just going to undo what I did. It's not hard to redo this. Okay. I'm going to keep my density about the same, but I'm going to bring down the average tree size because I think they're way too big. Even that's too big. Bring this down. There we go. That's a better size. That's more believable, I would say. Okay. I do like the size of the model. I just feel like even these are too big, unfortunately. And so if I turn off random, I'm going to end up with, you know, the trees all being consistent. I don't really want that. So we will keep them at the size that they are at. Maybe even the original that I had was okay, but we'll just put them in for now. Okay, now keep in mind, you can adjust. Like if I delete this all again, I don't want to keep doing this, but if I lock the height, okay, if I adjust this width of the trees, again, it's not making much of a difference because of the fact that I am looking at this sort of so closely from one angle here. It bugs me that the trees are not going smaller. I would love, like I could probably put a bunch of zeros in here and make smaller trees, but it seems to almost be limiting out at the size that I have. So I think I'll just leave it on random and I'll leave the trees as is. Again, if you're doing your own world, maybe don't shrink the terrain so much as we did at the start. It seems to be the issue why this is messing up, but I'm kind of happy with that. I think it looks good. I've got this little cove that he's in with trees, and if I press play, you can kind of get a sense of sort of the world is a little more lively with these trees in here. Got some weird pop-in issues, but then again, that could just be the preview that we're seeing. All right. So next what we're going to do is we're going to add some grass. And grass is kind of cool. That's how you would do trees, but we're going to go into the details, into the grass. So we go to paint details, which is the next one. And details can be any object that is on the ground, small objects. And it's very similar to the trees, but this time I'll just show you how to do it. We're going to go back to terrain objects. We're going to bring in the grass and flowers kit that I've included. So we're going to bring that in. There we go. And inside grass and flowers, you will see there's tons of different ones that we can add here. And grass specifically is the one that we are going to be adding to this world. Okay, so inside of grass, you're actually going to see 4 different versions of grass. And the way that grass works by default may not be the best way. The way Unity handles is kind of weird. These are actually just PNGs. They're just transparent images. So they don't actually have 3D. It's not an actual 3D model of grass. It's a PNG of grass that's cut out. I'm going to show you what this looks like. This is the default way that you add grass in Unity. So you go to edit details, you're going to add grass as a texture, okay, and you're going to take the grass and add it, okay, and hit add. You will also notice you can add a detail mesh, and the mesh is the 3D grass I was talking about, all right? But in this case, we have a texture, which is actually just an image of grass. I'm going to add another one. That'll be the grass 3. That will also get added. But I'm going to tell you guys, there's a little hack that you can do with Unity. And that is that you can take a grass model and use the tree, paint it with trees the same way, and it'll work just as good. But this is also really cool. You can just kind of click and put grass in there wherever you want. Okay, target strength, we'll just bump it right up. And we're going to add pieces of grass sort of wherever, sort of sporadically spread out throughout our scene, something like this. Now, the one thing that you will notice is that we don't have the same options, or not nearly as many options as we do with the trees. And that's just because we, again, I think with our shrunken scene, we have limited amounts that we can add. Now you'll notice that the trees, sorry, not the trees, the grass will sway in the wind as it's put in. Okay, and it does that by default. You can turn that off if you don't like it. I'll show you where to set that as well. So if you go under settings, terrain settings, you can control in here pretty much every aspect of the terrain itself, and you'll see the wind setting is right here. So you can have your speed set to 0 if you want, and the grass should stay still. It won't move at all. Okay, so you can see that. It looks a little more believable, a little more interesting if the grass is swaying in the wind. Okay, so 0.5 is probably a good setting. And you can see again all sorts of settings for your environment are included inside of here. So that is where you would set that part of the world. All right, now let's do a couple other things. Let's add a few buildings. Okay, so we're going to go back to terrain objects. In this one, I'm going to look up the medieval house. I'm going to put that in. And this is just a prefab object, FBX, from Blender. All right, and it should be, let's just take a look at the model. There it is. Okay. And we're just going to drop in a house somewhere here. It's quite large. We will scale it down. Scale that down. You know, I prefer using this because then I got all my options at once here. Whoops. Can't see my blocks though for some reason. So we will scale. We'll do it this way, I guess. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, guys. I am really having a moment here. We're going to just use this. I don't know why I don't just use this to begin with. Now, you'll notice a problem with this house that I've added here. The area around it is glowing, like crazy glowing. There's a reason for that. And this was something that I actually mentioned a long while back when we were talking about importing objects from Blender. This object, this medieval house, has inside of it a lamp, has a light source from Blender that is inside of there. If that ever happens to you, if you ever have that, you can go into the object and turn it off. Okay, same with the camera. You shouldn't have a camera as well. You can turn those off. Or you can break it apart by right-clicking and ungrouping. Where's that object? Oh, prefab and unpack. You could do that and delete them. But I simply will turn them off. I'll come in here and turn them off because they'll cause all sorts of problems where the lighting does not, just doesn't make any sense compared to the lighting in the actual scene that you are putting it into. So let's scale this up a bit. Let's get it a little bit bigger. Oh, I'm not going to use that tool because that tool drives me crazy. Let's go maybe 0.4. It's hard to tell because, again, in relation to the guy, maybe 0.5. And I'm going to move it up like this. And you can see that it's casting a nice shadow, which is great. We're going to get some clipping of the trees breaking into the house. Now, again, this is where you'd spend time cleaning up your world as you're working on it. We're going to hit play. And we're going to see that now the house is there and the chest is next to it. The height's not bad, maybe a little smaller. That door is massive. Oh, I noticed another thing we didn't do is we did not, let's go back to 0.3, sorry. I noticed that we did not put a collider on it, so he's able to walk right through it. So I'm going to select the house, add a component. We can use a mesh collider. Let's try mesh collider in this case. Should be fine. Let's test it. There it is. Oh, the mesh collider is not working. So if that happens, because it does happen from time to time, we could go to the object directly, which is a cube in this case. It could be because we were putting a mesh collider on the entire prefab, which is maybe not the best way to do it. So let's go straight to the cube, which is the house, and let's put a mesh collider on that instead. That should work. Okay, let's test that out. Yeah, that works great. House size is still a little bit, now it's a little too small. We got some grass that's obviously cutting through the house, but generally speaking, it's working pretty nice. Now, let's say we want to change the time of day. This is something that comes up quite a bit. Like, you know, you don't want to just have this bright, like sunny day every day sort of thing. Maybe you want it to be evening, or maybe you want it to be just a different time of day period. What you need to do is you need to look for the directional light object, which is somewhere in the scene. Okay, I'm actually going to move it and bring it up so I can actually see it because it's hiding back there. We'll bring it over to our scene somewhat so that we can actually see it. This, by the way, because it's a directional light object, it does not matter how close or how far away it is. But what you can do, which I think is really cool, and I can't remember whether I showed this already, is with the directional light object selected, you can change all the light settings in here, the color of the light, how intense the light is, all that stuff. But in the rotation, so you can use rotation like this, or you can use the transform tool, either way. In the rotation, you can change the time of day, right? And you can see that the skybox, called the skybox, will change as you rotate the directional light. So you can totally change whether it's evening or morning, or you can basically change everything about the direction of the light. And what this is going to do is it's going to give your games a lot more sort of atmosphere, I guess, more environmental sort of, it'll just make the environment more interesting. And when you play that, you'll see now that the time of day has changed. It's sort of more of an evening now. And we're, you know, it's still going to run the same, but now you got shadows sort of coming across him from the back. One last thing I want to show, which I think is really worth showing, and again, I know this two-part video for Terrain Editor, it's a long one. Last thing I want to show is skyboxes. So if we go back to Terrain Objects and we add a skybox, which I will drag from the folder of stuff I've given you guys. Skybox. A skybox is basically a world, sorry, not a world, it's a sky that you can download, and it's made up of 6 images that are stitched together to make one complete sort of entire world, 360 degrees. And the way you add this component, I'm going off memory here, we go to Window, Rendering, Lighting. Okay, so Window, Rendering, Lighting. And inside of our light settings, we are going to see environment. Yes, there's our skybox right here. So if I take this one that I just dropped in, Skybox 6, and I put that in there, you may not see it very clearly, but you will notice now that our world now has clouds, and it's definitely a better looking world. It's more of a realistic environment. Okay, now remember, this is how to create a game that's sort of third person, but we can easily apply some of these principles to putting the camera inside of the person to make it first person. And then you would actually be able to look around and see that skybox a lot better. But because we're kind of looking down, we would have to maybe climb this mountain or something or whatever to actually be able to see that. All right. Now, if you're trying to create sort of zones for where your people can't go out of, let's say you're making a world and you don't want them to be able to climb over this hill and then walk out of the map, that's very simply done by creating blocks with colliders just to block the areas where they can't go. And it has nothing to do with terrain. Even if you make the terrain super steep, people will sometimes find a way to get out of your terrains. So make sure you actually create colliders so that they can't escape from the areas you want them to explore. All right, so as you can tell, guys, this game is coming right along in a very short amount of time. Now that we have all the physics and sort of mechanics of the game working, we now have a world that's a little more interesting, a little more that we can sort of look at and check out and actually play with here. And it's starting to really come together. It's starting to actually look like a game rather than just a demo that I'm, trying to explain to you. This is starting to look like something. So stay tuned to the next one. We're going to get into some more fun stuff. All right. Talk to you in a bit.